You wouldn't attempt to run a marathon without doing some training first. And yet many of us fall into our first leadership role without understanding what it takes to train to lead. In today's episode, I'm joined by Christian Muntean, the founder of Vantage Consulting. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what it takes to train to lead, how to train the right habits in your leadership, how to learn how to lead different people in different situations, things like knowing when to step in and when to step back. We do a deep dive on intentional leadership, being intentional as a leader for better results. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Christian Muntean. Christian is the founder of Vantage Consulting, and he's an advisor to companies, executives, and boards around the role of leadership and unlocking value in their organization with an incredible track record of success. He's also the author of multiple books, including his latest offering, Train to Lead, which has a metaphor attached to it around thinking like an Olympic athlete, around how training for events can transpire into how we prepare ourselves for leadership roles. Most people fall into their first leadership role. They end up being promoted because of some kind of competence in their area, but not necessarily having had the training on what it means to be a leader. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation today, unpacking a bit of Christian's background and what led him to do what he does today, and then getting deep into his new book. So Christian, without any further ado, I'd love it if you would say hello to the audience, and I'd love to hear a flavor of your background prior to what you do now that led you and inspired you to do what you do with companies and leaders.
Yeah, sure, Meg. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Yeah, my background in terms of what inspired me to lead or get involved in leadership was I was working in disaster relief internationally. And so I was working in disaster zones and war zones in a lot of different countries around the world. And I started to notice that you could work in a very well-funded project in a relatively secure area. And if your team wasn't led well, or if your partners in the community weren't led well, it was very, very hard to be successful. And on the other hand, you could be in a very insecure project, an insecure area with almost no funding. But if there was good leadership, there was all sorts of things that could get accomplished. And so I became fascinated with that dynamic. I thought our work was important, and I wanted to understand why so frequently we left leadership to chance. And so I began studying that and pursuing that. That was the genesis of my interest in leadership topics.
Yeah, really interesting, Christian. Now, I agree with you. Everything rises and falls on the back of leadership. It doesn't matter the knowledge and skills of the team if it's not being curated into an environment where people can do their very best work. What I'm curious to know is, what does good leadership look like to you?
That's a good question. I think to a certain degree, good leadership depends on the context. You know, a good leader leading a military unit versus leading an artists cooperative is going to look in different ways. But I think ultimately an effective leader is one that is able to inspire a shared vision and move people commonly towards a common goal, and to do so in a way that builds the people that they're leading, that helps them become more able and bigger people.
Yeah, really, really good, Christian. So there's a few things I'm picking up there. The first one is around situational leadership and adaptive leadership. So situational leadership is adjusting to the situation in front of us, whether it's the military example that you went for, you might be in a not-for-profit, adapting to the situation. It could even be the moment in time, the difference between the businesses in crisis versus the businesses in a growth phase versus a declining phase. You're going to have to adjust to the situation.
Even the individual you're working with.
And then adaptive leadership to adapt to the individuals, because you're not going to lead an intern the same way that you lead a 30-year veteran of your industry. So adapting to the individuals as well. That's really powerful. And then I'm hearing two major streams here, which is setting the vision of where we're going to go, and then empowering the people, be a multiplier so that they can bring their best gifts to the table. How does that sit with you? Those two chapters, vision and then create the environment.
When you say, how does it sit with me? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
My reflection back to you about those two key pillars of setting the vision and then creating the environment and letting people go and just being a multiplier instead of, you don't have to have your fingers all over everything. You've employed these people for a reason.
Well, I think one of the biggest differentiators between a leader and pretty much anyone else is the ability to inspire a shared vision. That comes from research done by Kouzes and Posner, and it's written in the Leadership Challenge. But that's just a core concept that if you can't inspire a sense of what we're trying to accomplish and where we're trying to go, then you're not really leading. You may be managing and you may be very effective as a manager, but your leadership implies a sense of taking people to someplace. On the other hand, I think that many times good leaders are empowering and building and growing and mentoring and nurturing people and allowing them to pursue the vision and the goals. But I do think there's a role at times for more directive leadership. There's a place where in crises, at times, in very complex scenarios with less experienced teams, with newer people, where more specific guidance and direction is needed to help them be successful. So again, it becomes situational or contextual, the level of support. And I think the skilled leader knows when to begin to step back and when they need to step in. And they're doing it in a way not fueled out of their own sense of insecurity or need to be the hero or whatever other drivers that can happen, or just not knowing what else to do. But it's really fueled by what will produce the best efforts from the team and the people that you're leading, the best results, I should say, from them.
Yeah, another really good example of the situational leadership there, Christian, and it is that ability to be able to sense when to step in, step back. I think that's a really good way of describing it. And if we don't get it right, you're going to end up with different levels of frustration. So if we're stepping in when we don't need to, people are going to get frustrated. Oh, won't the boss just let us do our job? And then if we don't step in when they need us, I don't feel supported. Like there's a spectrum here, but it changes situation by situation. Any tips that you can give to leaders that are looking to master that skill of when to step in, when to step back?
Yeah, and I want to add a component to that as well, because you can get frustration or ranges on that, but there's also a learned helplessness that you teach. And so one of the most common scenarios that I work with when I'm working in a succession dynamic where there's a leadership transition is that you have a very dynamic, very strong leader who built a company, an entrepreneurial leader, and they brought in people who just followed directions really, really well. They're fantastic executors. And what happens is they often don't know how to make decisions, identify or maintain or keep their culture to drive performance on their own without the presence of that individual. And so there's that element as well. I think your question, though, was maybe you need to reframe your question. I think I distracted myself.
And good point about what culture have you created and what kind of team do you have around you. That's an interesting element of this. My question was about any tips that you can give a leader that doesn't know, like, should I step in here or should I step back? Like they're not sure what is needed in that situation.
I think generally everything, I'm very much a subscriber to the concept of outcome-based, management or leadership. And so basically, the more that you can step away and your team's still able to accomplish the results. So you're always sort of testing out the individuals and the teams. To what degree are they able to accomplish results that we've defined in advance so they understand what they're trying to do? And then what level of support seems to be needed. And so I think I don't think you can just kind of set it and forget it. I think there's always a little bit of testing and seeing and adjusting to make sure that they need it, because even on a single project, you have an engineering background. So on a single project, a project may fly fine for a long time, but then there may be a period where it's really important for a leader to step in and just make something happen and then step back out. And I think the leader has to be watching for how effectively is the team working together to accomplish the result, And is the struggle that they're having right now, this is something that I think is very hard to put specifics to. I think it's something you learn through experience, but is the struggle something you just need to let them wrestle through, or should you step in? And there's times for either answer, and being able to discern, what the right answer is right now is a challenge. The biggest thing I find, and it's hard, but the biggest thing I find is that leaders confuse the success of their team or the success of a project or whatever they're trying to accomplish with their own personal levels of trust and comfort and identity. And so they start to identify themselves with that. And there's some reason for that, because there is a reflection on the leader. But I find that leaders are more often acting out of their own internal dynamics than they are to what the team is actually doing, or at least that happens frequently. And so that's something that I really encourage leaders to spend time reflecting on, is the degree to which their need to step in has to do with personal difficulties with trust or letting go, and not because the team can or can't perform. If that makes sense.
Really powerful. So I'm going to unpack a little bit there, Christian. The theme that I'm picking up on here is the intentionality. To really intentionally think about, how do I need to show up today? What is going to serve the team well? And there's going to be moments in time where the team need me to lead from the front because we need to get on top of whatever this challenge is. Then there's going to be times where it's going to serve the team better if I step back, sometimes letting them scrape their knees. They're about to make a mistake, but I need to let them make that mistake so that they can learn from it. And if I become the answer to everyone's question, all they learn is the dependence or the learned helplessness that you were talking about before. But there's an interesting additional question that I'm picking up with what you just said. When I'm doing that intentional step of, how am I going to show up today? Is it step in? Is it step back? Is it to become curious and ask more questions? I also ask myself, am I doing this for me and my own insecurities? Or am I doing it because it's best for team? How does that sit with you?
So when I first started getting into executive coaching years ago, I thought that I would mostly be working with helping people develop strategy, helping them execute tactics and learn tips and skills and tricks and all these kinds of things. And what I have learned is that the vast majority of my time is working on really the internal game. Self-image issues that leaders are wrestling with is a big part of that. Dealing with fear, dealing with anxieties that they have, dealing with ego, dealing with all those kinds of things. And so I have come to the conclusion that that is where or a major part of the game is won or lost, is in that internal game.
This is a really big takeaway for me, Christian. I'm going to be thinking about this because I've been prescribing to this concept of intentional leadership for quite some time. So asking myself the question, I look at my calendar before the start of a day. I look at every meeting and I go, how do I need to show up for that meeting? Is it curious? Am I going to intentionally be the last one to speak in this meeting? Whereas another meeting, I might be intentionally the first one to speak, et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm going to add a question into my repertoire to make sure that when I choose my intentional identity that I'm showing up with, is it about me or is it about them? That's a really powerful takeaway for me today.
Yeah, that's a great exercise that you do. Part of my background is in conflict resolution and mediation. And when I was learning to mediate, because mediation is this confidential process, it's hard to get input on how well you're doing. And so I started doing a similar process. I go into another mediation or into another meeting phase of the conversation, and I would set goals. Like, here's what I hope to accomplish in this conversation, and then do a little, call it an after action review. What did I intend to do? What did I actually do? What was the result of that? What have I learned, or what will I do differently? And I just spend 5 or 10 minutes after each, conversation I would have with clients, reviewing that for myself. And part of it in mediation and in leadership, you realize it's not just the application of skills. It's, how am I reacting to this whole environment? I'm in a room with people that are fighting. How do I lead them or guide them and not get drawn into their own drama? And so that ability to self-reflect and set goals for that I think it's a high level leadership skill that most people don't consider. And when they do start to consider it, they start to unlock a capacity to have influence that can be pretty surprising for them.
Three really powerful chapters emerging, Christian. One is the intentional, how am I going to show up for this meeting? Then I picked up a thread there of when the meeting's in place, I'm also processing each time going, what response is going to serve the team well right now? And then I love your after action review. What went well, what didn't go well, what would I do differently next time? This is how we learn and grow as a leader. And it's not a perfect science. You're not going to get it right every day. You're not going to get it right every day.
Kind of a sloppy art. But, I think part of that, Mick, hopefully this is helpful for listeners, because I think, well, I don't know how other people are. I know the way I have often been is you hear an idea and you think, okay, I'm going to start doing that. And there's sort of an assumption that I'll just do it and I'll get it right and it'll just work right away. And what I've learned with leadership, something I say in my book a lot, or I just say a lot, is that you lead out of who you are, out of the person of the leader. And so it takes a lot of iterations, it took a lot of iterations of practice for all of us to become who we are. We had lots of experiences to get to where we're at. If I want to become a better listener in a conversation, or I want to be careful about how I might get triggered and engage in a way that's unproductive in a meeting, it may take iterations. I may have to kind of find courage within myself to face that again and again and again and just incrementally improve. Sometimes there's things that just bump us forward, but most of the time it takes revisiting it over and over and over again and getting your reps in.
Yeah, it is. It's like habit forming. We're going to talk about your book in the moment, and habits is where it all starts with. With that, there are a couple of things that emerge from me there, Christian, is that you won't get it right every time. So have a bit of compassion for yourself. Try it. If you don't try, you won't know. So try it and then learn and grow as you go. And I've got to throw back in there the adaptive leadership again. The challenge is that what works for one of your team members may not work for another team member. Worse still, what worked for one team member now may not work for the same team member 2 years from now, because they're on their own path of learning and growth as well. So we need to adapt as we go.
I want to underline that because I frequently meet leaders who are, proud of their leadership style, or feel like, and they have built success out of doing things the way that they're doing, but that success is bounded. There's a limit to where they can go with it. And it's because they're not being adaptive in their leadership. They're not looking at context or at the individuals. And so I think there is a tendency for some leaders to figure out something and then to stop learning and stop growing, or to feel like maybe that even wasn't part of their option. They just it's kind of a fixed mindset perspective. Like, this is who I am. It's how I operate. So I'm going to get good at that and not push out on that. And I think that limits. It's a self-limiting perspective that doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, very good. Okay, excellent, Christian. Now, I do want to use this as a segue towards the book. Let's talk about the ultimate premise in the first place. So train to lead. Tell us what train to lead means.
Yeah, so part of my background is that in athletics. So I've been involved in sports pretty much my whole life. Still do. I still, lift weights and practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And anyways, for about 12 years as a hobby, I was teaching a couple of strength and conditioning classes at a gym. And I love the topic. It's very fascinating to me. It's interesting. Everything about how the body responds to stress and how you can get it to grow, and just the experience of coaching and leading people through that. I was driving away from the gym one day and I thought, why is it that you can take an athlete, a marathon runner, MMA fighter, whoever, and you can develop a training program so that they will peak out and be at their best right before their event. Whereas for leadership, it's always sort of a crapshoot. we at best we'll give a leader a leadership book or send them to a course that just sort of fire hoses ideas at them and then say, now don't screw up. And I thought, for a topic as consequential as leadership, there's got to be a better way. And so I started looking at, is there anything I can learn from training design in athletics that could be applied to leadership. And I realized it was a deep well. There's a lot of room to go in terms of that concept of helping create a structure for which topics really need to be foundational. And if they're not foundational, they're going to cause problems later. And which topics are dependent. They really require other things to have been learned to be able to exercise them well. And ways to approach it, ways to approach growing as a leader if somebody's trying to. So that's the basic concept. Was I applied kind of a large model for training athletes to how you can train leaders. And I started experimenting with clients, and I found it was really successful. I could help a client that was needing to learn leadership skills peak out, so to speak, in a predictable amount of time. And by peak out, I don't mean that they became the best leader in the world in that period of time, but they became the best that they could be in that period of time.
That's what we all want. We want to be the best leader we can be. We don't have to. It's a work in progress for everyone. No one. It's like unfinished business. No one ever finishes leadership. There's no such thing. So, but to get on that program early could be the difference. And I have to share that is my lived experience, my own personal experience. And then what I see in so many companies today, people do get promoted for different reasons. It might be their technical skill. It could be charisma being confused with leadership skills. I think that's often something that's a bit of a misnomer as well. There's charisma and leadership are not synonymous. It's just, but it does seem to happen. And then people fall into their first leadership role and they haven't got the reps in that you're talking about. So when do you think is the right time though? Is it 2 years before their first leadership role? Is it on the day of their first leadership role? When should someone start training to lead?
Oh, the basic concepts of, I'll use athletic analogies then. I haven't been asked that question, so it's an interesting question. I think an athletic perspective is, I think that people should practice good nutrition and have some kind of fitness practice, even if it's just walking, throughout their whole life, whether or not they're going to become an athlete, whether or not they'll ever compete. I think just having good, healthy practices in your life is going to make you a healthier, higher functioning, happier person. And the research shows all of those things. So I would say that some of these practices can be begun by anybody who has an interest or sees this on their horizon, potential leadership at any point. There isn't a too early point of view. There are certain things that the book gets into that are hard to practice unless you actually have a leadership role, some of the more advanced topics. But most of the base, most of the foundation, you don't have to be, just like a lot of strength and conditioning doesn't require that you're a competitive athlete to build that base. It's the same thing with leadership. Most of the base that you need in terms of your perspectives, your personal habits, the influences you allow into your life, how you manage your time and your priorities and your energy, your ability to follow through on things, self-management skills, all of those things help you succeed in life, even if you're not leading.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you a business leader who wants to make a difference in the world? You need more than fluency in strategy, marketing, or even sustainability. You must understand how business interacts with society. Hi, I'm the host of Business and Society with Senthilnathan podcast. In the 30-minute fortnightly episodes, I promise to bring you the best ideas to develop you as a leader who can help shape business as a force for good. Join me as I discuss with some of the world's leading thinkers to understand the role of business and society. Subscribe to the Business and Society with Senthilnathan podcast.
Yeah, really, really powerful tips here, Christian. It's a good way of thinking of it. A few things that popped into my head while you were talking is I did use the word leadership role, but leadership doesn't have to be a position. It's about your influence on others, your ability to inspire others, like you were saying before. So it doesn't have to be a position. And I'm looking at the book to my right as we speak about this. You talk about habits, you talk about foundation. A lot of these can be life skills, regardless of what position you have in your company, right?
Yeah, they're all life skills. They're all life skills. Not all leadership skills are life skills, but these foundational ones,
The foundational ones.
the first two sections of the book are going to make your life better and more productive, regardless of whether or not you have a formal leadership role.
Yeah, really good. And we speak about leadership in 3 dimensions. This is something we talk about a lot on the show. The first dimension is leading self. It's not even about others. The second dimension is leading others. Third is leading the business. So when it comes to leading self, you can start today. You can start yesterday. So yeah, really good. All right. So let's talk about those first 2 chapters. Tell us about building habits and forming the foundation. Let's start with the habits. What do these habit building reps, I'll call it reps again to use the training analogy, what do they look like?
So some of the basic concept, if you want to become a fit person, using that analogy, or become an athlete, there's a saying we use in the US, I don't know if it's in Australia, but that 6-pack abs are made in the kitchen. There's another saying that you can't outrun a donut. And the basic concept for both of those is that, you can go and look on the internet or buy a magazine that'll tell you how to get 6-pack abs, and it'll give you exercises for it. But the reality is it's how you eat, how you sleep, and just how you manage yourself in terms of nutrition that has the biggest influence on whether or not you'll ever see your abs, if that's something you want to do. And applying that to leadership, I'm looking at the influences that we have in our life. Are we bringing good nutrition in? Are we having healthy influences in terms of relationships, in terms of what we expose ourselves to, in terms, like podcasts and books and so on? Are we moving toxic things out of our life in terms of all of those things, relationships and so on, but also perspectives and mindsets that we carry? And until we've done that, those will always be working against it. Just like in fitness, you can run 5 miles a day, but if you come home and eat a box of donuts, you're not going to see what you're hoping to see. Same thing in leadership. I would say the majority of my time working with executives, high-level executives, is we're coming back to these very basic, fundamental, non-leadership specific topics about basic self-maintenance and self-management. And so the other topic, I reference conditioning. And in fitness, conditioning is the preparing the body for stress. And it's the ability to handle, resistance and tension without hurting yourself. And I apply that to the concepts of self-management, which I alluded to earlier, which has to do with energy and priority management, has to do with being able to follow through. It has to do with practices like that, knowing how to exercise patience. And there's a few other qualities that if you put them into place, it overall makes you successful, particularly if you combine it with the habits of bringing in positive influences and limiting or restricting negative influences in your life. All of that together does produce transformative effects for people, whether they're in or not in leadership. And we haven't even begun talking about leadership specific skills yet. It's just how to be kind of a healthier, more robust human being.
Yeah, really good, Christian. I'm going to play back a few things to you here. We do have a similar saying in Australia around, I think it's something like 6 packs are built in the gym but exposed in the kitchen or something like that. It's very similar to what you said. And what I take from that is then habits. Which habits are working for you and which ones are not working for you? I'm going to reference the work here of The Inner Game from Timothy Galway. And he talks about performance is equal to potential minus interference. And when I hear you talking about habits and I hear you talking about virtuous habits that are building strength, and then I'm hearing you talk about donuts that might be holding us back from what we're trying to achieve, looking at our daily habits and going, which ones are serving me and which ones are actually holding me back? It's almost like a habit checklist or something to go through. What am I doing that's working, and what am I doing that's actually a form of interference that's stopping me from being the leader that I could be? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I often assign my clients those checklists. Some of it's the work is to try to identify them. Oftentimes I'll give them some basic checklists in terms of things to do. I mean, there's a lot of research around this, and it seems simple, but it works. And sometimes we dismiss simple ideas because they sound simple. But there's habits that I've given many clients and just asked them to try it out for a period of time. And they're in the book. But taking a walk once a day for at least 10 or 15 minutes in sunlight or around a green area has a transformative effect on how you think and how you're reacting and on your body's cortisol levels, your stress levels, which impacts your ability to think clearly and think well and solve problems and so on. Having intentionality, we talked about that earlier. So starting your day out, this is a Dan Sullivan concept, if you're familiar with him, but it's starting your day out deciding, okay, what's one thing I'm going to win at today or accomplish today? And what's one thing I won at or accomplished yesterday? And starting each day out with an intent of what you want to do, but then also acknowledging a win. Even if yesterday went sideways, saying, but I came home and didn't kick the dog. I wanted to, and I held back. That was my win for the day. And the intent in that, and for some people, it's not as valuable. For other people, it's transformative, is to start to change the narrative we have about ourselves, about being helpless and not able to have impact. And so when every day you're deciding, I want to have this impact, and this is the impact I had yesterday, positive, both, and not just getting stuck in all the mistakes we made or regrets of things we didn't do, which is what most people think about, is we want to create a positive inventory that feeds our perspective, because that begins to reshape our self-image. And most people benefit from that. So those are a couple of exercises. I have others in the book, but those are very simple things that take, very little time. Sitting by yourself for 5 minutes, listening to music or meditating or in contemplative prayer or some kind of practice, quiet, still practice. Especially in today's culture where people hop on the phone or need constant stimulation, to be able to pull yourself away from that and practice being still and being alone with your thoughts brings up interesting things in people and can be very difficult for some people, can even be very emotional, just sitting by themselves. And so learning to have these very simple practices like this starts to bring in or make room for some positive influences. And then other things have to do with curating your relationships. If you're spending time around, there's some really, really good research around this, very long research, meaning longitudinal research. The Framingham Heart Study is what I reference in the book, which is a study of a community in the United States that's been under the microscope for about 70 years. And it started out exploring heart health. And as they kept asking questions and getting to know the community, they began to discover that simple things like the people that you were around, their behavior around, like if they were obese or if they smoked, increased the likelihood that you might be overweight or that you might smoke. But it's not even your immediate circle. It can go back multiple circles that you have these different degrees of connection, and it still influences you. And the takeaway is to be conscientious about who you surround yourself with and what news you listen to. And is it encouraging you or is it frustrating you every day? And those kinds of topics. So it's very basic, uncomplicated practices you can bring into your life that will have a transformative effect. Every single client that's practiced them has changed as a result.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're a private practice owner, here's why you want to hire virtual assistants. Virtual assistants not only can perform all of the non-clinical responsibilities by supporting or replacing your current team, but they can do it at a fraction of the cost, all while improving the patient care experience. Virtual Rockstar was created for private practice owners by a private practice owner who wants to help you gain greater profitability and freedom. We'll teach you how to work with virtual assistants, all while helping bring a family out of poverty. Visit www.virtualrockstar.com today to learn more and book your free discovery call at www.virtualrockstar.com.
Yeah, really good. I'm hearing a lot of intentional acts again now. Making the
Very
time.
intentional. Yeah, none of that happens on accident.
No, exactly. Making the time in your diary for that walk in the sun that you spoke about. Thinking about who am I surrounding myself with? Where am I getting my newsfeed from? Is it social media and algorithmic bias that's a virtuous one, or is it a spiral where I just read doom and gloom? And yeah, really, really interesting, Christian. In that first chapter, there was in the first section, there's 3 chapters that really caught my attention. How I see myself, how I see others, how I see life. Tell me more about those 3 chapters.
Yeah, so how I see myself is a lot of what I've been describing, in the sense of, if I see myself as someone, here's a simple example. If I see myself as someone who's ultimately a victim of circumstances or a victim of fate, I'm going to have a very difficult time leading effectively, because I'm always going to doubt or second guess the value of my intentionality, or can I actually try to make a difference? And on the other hand, if I see myself as a person who is valuable and who brings value to others, then it becomes much easier for me to act that way. If I feel like my identity is always being challenged or questioned, the chances of me showing up defensively in the workplace or needing to be a perfectionist and prove myself in some way, which has all sorts of negative associated behaviors connected to it, it'll impact me in one way. On the other hand, if I realize, okay, I'm not perfect, but every day I'm working at getting better and improving, or I've reached a level of confidence in my life and assurance in my life that I'm not threatened by somebody's critique or a differing opinion, you can enter conversations with a calm and with a purposefulness and an ability to listen to others and problem solve that wouldn't be available to you otherwise, just because of your perspective on yourself. Same thing when you see others. So there's a study I reference in the book out of Harvard where they took rats and handed them to students and said, okay, these rats right here, these are low performing rats. They had the students run them through the maze. And they said, we don't expect them to perform as well, but we want you to time their ability to go through the maze. Then they gave the students another set of rats and they said, these are smart rats. These are high performing rats. Run them through the maze. And these are probably going to do better. And they did. The rats did better. The reality is the rats were all from the same pile of rats, or probably not in a pile, but from the same set of rats. There was no difference between any of the rats. The only difference in the study was the expectations of the students, that the students expected slowness from one set of rats and they expected speed from the other set of the rats. And repeatedly, predictably, the rats who can't talk and understand the humans performed down or up to the expectations of the students. And that variations of that study, it's called the expectancy effect or the Pygmalion effect. It's a very, very well studied effect, and it's often been used in schools and in classrooms. And you see this happening with students as well, where teachers that have been told these students are low performers and these students are high performers, no difference between the students. At the end of the year, the low performers will have lower grades. The ones that were labeled as low performers will have lower grades. And the ones that were labeled as high performers will have higher grades, completely irrespective of what their actual academic background was before showing up in the classroom. And the translation of that is, if I walk into my workplace thinking I work with a bunch of dolts who can't get it, can't figure it out, and this team just doesn't understand what they're doing, and the hiring market's so lousy right now, and I have that perspective, I will get results that will match something like my perspective. I'll just start to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. The research shows this very clearly. On the other hand, if I come in and I think these people have potential and I think I can get the best out of them, not in a Pollyanna-ish kind of way where I deny reality or what's going on, but from the perspective of I see their potential and I want to help them get there, it allows that to happen. It sets up the conditions where they can succeed, and I will get different results from that. Same thing when I look at life. As a leader, if I view life as an us against them scenario where we're constantly under attack, the economy is always going to fall apart, if there's a lot of negativity or pessimism about that, I'll be limited in my options. And I see this all the time with clients that are afraid to take risks, clients that are afraid to change, afraid to make moves, or they're reactive or however they respond, versus ones who can be intentional. The only way to navigate life effectively, to say I'm here now and I want to go there, is to have the belief that life is navigable, or that your business and dynamic is navigable. And if you don't believe that, then you can't effectively lead people through it. And so, I provide exercises and explore that in each of those areas, but it's really important that people evaluate, how do you see? Because how you see influences how everyone that you attempt to lead will respond. It's a long answer, but
oh no, this is brilliant, Christian. This is my next big takeaway from our discussion today. And what I'm going to add there is the confirmation bias that might fuel all of this. So how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we see life, we start seeing the things that confirm what we already believe, unless we take interventional steps to go step back now and go, hang on a second, do I know that to be true? So that the self, the Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you can't, you're probably right. The others, you talk about the confirmation bias of others. If you believe something about someone, you'll start seeing all the things that confirm what you believe, and you'll ignore the things that are contrary to what you already believed about that person. And then life, if you think life is unfair, if you walk around thinking life is unfair, you'll see every skerrick of evidence that proves to you that life is unfair. Whereas if you have a creator mindset that, life is what I make it, you'll start seeing all the things that confirm that life is what you make it. Yeah, really powerful stuff, Christian.
it's fascinating. I think all of that is very interesting. And it can kind of sound woo-woo-y, but all of what we just went over has so much research behind it. And so it's not just ideas that somebody, wrote up and it sounds good. It's actually all validated, empirically based concepts, evidence-based concepts, if you want to use that language, that are at least worth exploring and worth trying. At a minimum, you're not going to hurt yourself by practicing some of these things. And my experience is you'll see change. And so, but I find that once you start getting into, some of the more classic leadership stuff about strategy and team dynamics, meetings and crisis and conflict, your ability to perform well in all of those areas is substantively impacted by what we've been talking about. And if you haven't done this pre-work, it's harder. It makes everything else harder. And you see that all the time.
Very good, Christian. I want to go to the next major section in the book, which is about the foundation. You spoke about building the reps and almost building your resilience and the conditioning and all of these things. You spoke about the priority management. I think everyone will recognize that as a key skill that people need to build into their life. You spoke about follow through, making sure that you do follow through. I think that's a bit of a 1%er, by the way. That's a lacking in a lot of people, whether they do follow through. Building patience, that was interesting as well. The one I'm curious about, you also talk about intensity. Where does intensity come in?
Yeah, so intensity in fitness, if you spend time in a gym at all, you'll see that there's some people that come in day after day and they do their routine and they never change. They never seem to lift anything heavier, run any faster. They don't seem to look any different physically. And there's no change. And almost always the answer to that is because they're working out at a comfortable level. They're not pushing themselves to an appropriate level of intensity that will force to get technical, to force their central nervous system to recognize we need to change, something's happening. And you have to push yourself to a certain point to generate that change. And so trained athletes do that naturally. People that are not trained as athletes, they find that really difficult. That's why people don't want to go to the gym, because it hurts, it's uncomfortable, all those feelings, and that's pushing into that level of intensity. So one side of intensity is recognizing, how do I push myself into discomfort and sustain that for an appropriate amount of time, not for forever, but how do I enter that intensity and then back off? Enter the intensity for the right amount of time and then back off. Then for people that are more driven, like a classic athlete, their challenge is the backing off. It's not entering the intensity. Most athletes you have to hold them back from not re-injuring themselves. They'll want to get out there, they'll want to play, they'll want to do their thing, and they'll do it to the point of hurting themselves and then just try to figure out how to keep going through the pain. And so for them, it's understanding what's enough intensity and then when do you rest? What's enough intensity and when do you rest? And I find this ability to manage intensity and to know how to apply the right amount of concentration and focus to actually produce change is a difficult ability or skill for most people. And I think it becomes harder for people that as they move up in leadership. executives can easily excuse their ability to focus on anything for more than 30 seconds based on all the fires that need to be put out and cats that need to be chased and all of that. And they will regularly say, well, I'm just running around chasing all these things. I can't take half an hour and solve this problem or build the business in this way. And they'll argue that almost always. I would say priority management and the ability to just focus is one of the most consistent executive challenges. And so that's the intensity. Am I answering the question?
Yeah, no, it's really good. It makes perfect sense to me. There's a few things there. I'll start with that last one. Whenever I hear someone say, I don't have time to, I often wonder, you don't have time not to.
Yeah. Yeah. You can have time for all the consequences.
Exactly.
Somehow you'll have time.
Yeah.
Either you got your hands, either you find the handles on the time or it runs you, but the time will be spent.
Exactly. And then on the intensity part, it's really interesting. So the biggest growth and learning happens just the other side of our comfort zone. So are we pushing ourselves outside our comfort zone? But then the rest and recovery, I do think we do have this wrong in corporate world, I'm going to say. Olympic athletes, they don't train at 100% intensity every day. Marathon runner doesn't run a marathon every day. Sometimes they're doing striding, or you're a conditioning coach, so you know better than me, striding at 70% capacity. They're not even running at race speed, but they're doing it to get the reps in, and they know when to push and they know when to back off. I don't know that we do that in corporate world, and we expect people to be running at 100% capacity for an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift sometimes. It's a bit insane. How can we break that? How can we get people to recognize that there needs to be an intensity dial that gets turned up to 11 sometimes and backed off to 7 other times?
Right. It's very difficult because I think in many workplaces, I don't know how it is in Australia. In the United States, there's a shift that's happening right now, but classically in the US, there's a culture of getting your accolades out of being the hardest worker in the room. And so a lot of my clients are in construction or in health or medical. And those are two industries that lionize people who work nonstop. It's the more hours you put in, the better it's perceived that you're doing. I see this beginning to change when the senior leader, because it's a cultural issue, it's when the senior leader begins to make the change themselves. And when that leader decides, and the truth is it's usually easier to be more productive if you're just intense in the right amounts and the right times, as opposed to all the time, because then you just burn yourself out. But if you start to learn those rhythms of when you're actually productive and when you're not, both through a day and then even seasonally, and you learn how to maximize that, as a general rule, my clients will come to me normally working 80-hour weeks, 60-hour weeks, 6-7 days a week, and they just believe that's the way it has to be. And as I work with them, the best testimonials I get are from their spouses who come back to me and say, I've got my spouse back. Like, he or she's home now and they're with the kids and they're at dinner and our weekends are free. And the company's doubled in the meantime. They're twice as large, or they're doing more work than they were doing before. And so it's true. The stuff works. But I think people are afraid to believe that more effort doesn't automatically relate to more results. So once the senior leader sees it and experiences it, they give permission to their team. And what's interesting is how often their team will also push back and say it's not possible. And so it's very deeply entrenched. It's a tough practice to change, but it's cultural. So that comes from values that come from senior leadership always. And then there's a system side where sometimes you can begin to change some of the way things are set up so that people don't feel like they have to run so hard. I mean, the most classic example for this is, as much as you can in your industry, if you can get away from hourly billing, and I just touched a sacred cow there, and everyone's going to tell me you can't, but you can almost always. If you can get away from hourly billing and just get into some other kind of value-based fees or project-based fees, all of a sudden your motivation goes away from working as much as you can to as little as you can and producing good results. And so just a simple systems change like that shifts it. In medicine in the United States, there's a driver for how many hours you have with patients, how many contact hours, how many patients. There's not a driver for healing people. You don't get reimbursed for healing people. You get reimbursed for the amount of time you spend with them. So the intrinsic motivation, regardless of the heart and values of each doctor, the intrinsic motivation of each clinic, of each hospital, is to get as much time with each person as possible, as opposed to let's get them better and let's get them on their way. And so changing some of these systems can also have an impact.
Yeah, this is eye-opening for me, Christian, to have this conversation. I think our models of working can be broken in this regard. I'll play back a few things here. The role modeling, really powerful. Start role modeling the behavior that you want to see in others. Think about what behavior you're celebrating and rewarding. So are the heroes in your organization, let's use a project management analogy here. Is it the project manager that worked their butt off and 14 hours a day to get their project across the line? Or is it the project manager that actually planned it better and worked more efficiently and got it done in 6 hours a day kind of thing? Who's getting rewarded? I say most companies, it's the one that was slogging it out and probably working inefficiently, but working longer. And then I go to the model for a second. I'm going to throw an analogy at you here. If you've got a plumbing problem in your house, do you want the plumber that's going to fix it in 15 minutes, or do you want the plumber that's going to take 7 hours to fix the problem?
Yeah, exactly.
The 15-minute guy, right?
Yeah, going back to your project management, as I said, I work with a lot of construction companies, and there is a belief that you should be putting in the 14-hour days and that that's what's rewarded. And there's a term I recently encountered called pseudo-productivity. And that's really rewarded, is this idea of it looks like you're busy, so we believe it's good. But my clients who learn to manage their projects more effectively, doing the things you described about better pre-planning, better project handoffs, better communication early on, better logistical planning, not only do they end up putting less effort and work into the project, but the projects are vastly more profitable. And they're putting less work into the whole thing. So they could potentially either carry more projects or just not do as much work. But until they've experienced that, and I see it consistently with clients across industries, across companies, and so I feel confident it works because I get to see it. They don't. They're used to what they've always seen, and it's how they were taught. And it's not that they're not achieving success. They are achieving a certain kind of success. And so it's not without merit. It's just, it could be different and it could be vastly better.
Yeah, really interesting, Christian. You give me a lot to think about. And those in the audience, think about your ways of working in your organization, whether they are optimal or not, and what you might do to start role modeling a different behavior. Really interesting, Christian. Look, we've been talking for quite some time here. We've barely scratched the surface of your book. We have focused on the two key first sections, the habit building, the foundations. And I do believe if we don't get those right, the rest become less impactful. For those that want to get a copy of the book, there's 26 chapters full of all of these revelations, and it all builds upon each other, making things happen, decisiveness, speed, and momentum, and then staying with it for the long term, and multiple insightful chapters of things that you can do to build from these habits and foundations that Christian has been talking about to become the best leader that you can possibly become. So congratulations on the success of the book. I encourage everyone to get a copy of it. It's really a great read, but also something that you can start implementing in your life and in your leadership. I want to take us now to our rapid round, Christian. So these are the same 4 questions we ask all of our guests. What's the one thing you know now, Christian Muntean, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I wish I knew when I was 20 that I didn't have to be perfect. That was an anchor that I carried for years, thinking I needed to get everything right, that it needed to be perfect, that my first try needed to be 100% in quality.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That's one of mine as well, for sure. What is your favorite book?
You know, that changes. I don't have a specific book that, to be honest, I probably, of all the books that I go back to regularly, it's probably the Bible that I go back to regularly in terms of orienting myself and grounding myself. But I have found that at different phases of my life, there are books that stand out to me and shape kind of where I'm at that time. And so I would say my answer is finding out which influencer, which book do I need at that moment to kind of help me understand or navigate this next growth phase for my life.
That's a good example of everything we've been talking about, Christian, about intentionality and situational and what's going to serve me well today. Which book is going to serve me well today? Nice. What's your favorite quote?
I have to read it because I don't have it memorized. So this is from Robert Greenleaf. Robert Greenleaf has passed away now, but he's the person who coined the term servant leader that everybody uses now. He's not the one who originated the concept, but he spent a lot of time talking about it. And so he has a test for servant leadership, which I find it has influenced me significantly in terms of how I view leadership and evaluate the effectiveness or success you asked me at the beginning of leadership. So here's the quote. Is the difference between a servant leader and what he calls a leader-first leader. It manifests itself in the care taken by the servant-first leader to make sure that the other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test and difficult to administer is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So that quote for me is a personal challenge in terms of how my leadership should manifest and show up and the impact that I hope to have.
There's a lot of powerful sub-messages in there, Christian, and I still take away a similar message to what we've been talking about today, which is what is going to serve them well right now. And it isn't always answering the question. It isn't always answering the question. Yeah, really good. All right, Christian, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel richer for this without any doubt.
Thank you, Mick. I've enjoyed it.
There's going to be people that are really interested in your work and want to know more. How do people find you? How do people find the book? How do people get in contact with you?
Yeah, the easiest way to get to me is through my website. So www.christianmuntean.com. And I've got tons of free resources there. And if you want to access me directly, you can do that. And then you can also get my book through there. But the best way is through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whichever bookseller is out there. You just type in Train to Lead or my name, Christian Muntean. You'll see the book and you'll be able to find it that way.
Outstanding, Christian. Thank you again for your time and for sharing your wisdom and insights today. It's been a true joy.
Oh, Mick, I enjoyed it. This was a fantastic conversation.
So there you have it. What an inspiring conversation with Christian Muntean. I hope you're walking away with new insights on building the right habits, knowing when to step in or step back, and how to lead with purpose and intentionality. In the next episode, it will be a solo cast where I'll share my personal reflections on this conversation with Christian. We'll dig deeper into key takeaways and I'll provide additional perspectives on developing that internal game of leadership and intentional self-management, and a deeper dive into situational leadership and adaptive leadership. I'm also going to dig into that Pygmalion effect and the impact of confirmation bias. If you're getting great value from our content, we would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast service. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you weekly video podcasts, curated videos, and our live stream show, all designed to help you become the leader that you wish you always had. Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.